Welcome to this League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County Special Member Meeting. This is being coordinated by a new voting rights interest group, which is part of our Advocacy Committee for our local league in Washtenaw County. Our voting rights interest group is working to inform and inspire our local members to be on top of what is going on in the arena of voting rights and voter suppression legislation. We meet on the first Monday of the month at 7 p.m. and Sue and I will put some more information about our interest group in chat as this meeting continues to proceed. And tonight's presentation is entitled Efforts by the Michigan Senate and Secure Michigan Vote Organization to Change Election Law in Michigan since the 2020 election. This is a conversation with Judy Kranjiff, League of Women Voters Michigan, Advocacy Committee leader, and Mark Brewer, an attorney with the law firm Goodman Acker. What we're going to hear this evening is information about state voting legislation. Number 2, about a petition, Secure Michigan Vote Petition. And number 3, we'll also be sharing information about federal voting legislation. Before I hand this off to our moderator, Lynn, I'm going to share some of the bios, some background information of our 2 excellent speakers for this evening. First, I'm going to start with Judy Kranjiff. She earned her master's degree in public administration from Western Michigan University, my alma mater too, very cool. And she was inducted into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame in 2012. She is chair of the Advocacy Committee and assistant treasurer of the League of Women Voters of Michigan, and previously served as president of the League of Women Voters in Michigan, and we appreciate her dedication. Before retiring, Judy was the executive director of the Michigan Women's Commission as appointed by the former Governor Granholm. She is former executive director for Planned Parenthood Affiliates and Advocates of Michigan and worked for 10 years on the Michigan House of Representatives policy staff. So I'm sure she'll have many insights to be able to give us today. And our second speaker, we're honored to have both of them, Mark Brewer of Goodman Acker. He received his Juris Doctorate degree from Stanford University Law School in 1981, where he served on law review. As an attorney, Brewer's principal areas of practice have included union side labor, election, campaign finance, and nonprofit law. He's been involved in a variety of election causes since the 1980s, including county, legislative, and congressional redistricting, presidential primaries, caucuses, recalls, recounts, ballot access, voter protection on election day, and the protection of the right to vote, a straight party ticket. As you can see, we have 2 very honored and qualified and interesting speakers for this evening. So I want to thank you all for coming. And again, our voting rights interest group is so happy with our local league of Washtenaw County to be able to support this. Now on to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Kristine. My name is Lynne Kochmanski, and I'm Vice President and Vote 411 Coordinator for the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County. It is my pleasure to moderate tonight's membership event. Tonight's event is educational in nature. We're going to be providing members with information that they can use when action is recommended. I want to thank Judy and Mark for agreeing to share their knowledge with our membership tonight. We will begin with Judy Kranjiff, who will give us some history and summarize voting legislation currently before the Michigan Senate. If you have questions for Judy, and we hope you do, please put them in the chat and we will be sure to address them after Judy's portion of the presentation. Judy, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you. I'm going to move to share screen. Just take a minute. I think it's working, correct? Everybody see it? Okay. So as you all know, this is through a grant from the League of Women Voters of Michigan Education Fund that we're providing this update. It's not an advocacy speech, it's educational. The voting rights, as you all know, changed with Promote the Vote that we all worked on in 2018, but just as a reminder, and I won't go through all these points, but you are eligible to vote now up through election day. If you meet all the criteria, you're able to register anytime up to 8 p.m. on election day in person. You're also now able to register online with your driver's license or state ID, or mail in an application, or do it in person, or do it with one of our groups like us. And you show proof of residency with your Michigan driver's license, your state ID, a current utility bill or a bank statement, et cetera, to get through the process. Before voting before election day, the major change with Promote the Vote was being able to get an absentee ballot for no reason. And you request that through an application where your signature is required. I'm sure we've all done that and made sure we signed the outside of that envelope before we've submitted it. And they're available now 40 days prior to the election, and they can be returned up to 8 p.m. on election day. And of course, there's military and overseas voters that can get voter absentee ballots. You can vote in person before election day, and it kind of varies with your clerk, but that also starts 40 days prior to election day. And in case you need to check your registration, you can easily do that now at www.mi.gov/vote. Or if it's available in your community through Vote 411 also. You probably have some elections coming up next Tuesday. On election day, you can register to vote at the clerk's office. If you are not registered or have moved, the polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can use your ID when you go to vote. But if you don't have your ID with you, you're now able to sign an affidavit. Absentee ballots must be submitted to the clerk or put in a drop box by 8 p.m. Just to remind you, this all where we're at today started with the 2020 election. I think I might have scooted by a slide. Let me go back. In 2016 and in 2020, Michigan had close presidential elections. President Trump won by 11,000 votes in 2016. And in 2020, President Biden won by almost 155,000. In 2020, however, we heard unproved claims of widespread fraud and unfair election for a presidential race only. Yet multiple audits, over 250, and court cases, Mark could tell you a lot more about them than I can, and a report by the Republican-led Michigan Senate Oversight Committee affirmed that the election was fair and secure. And I'd just like to take a moment to highlight the report that was put out by Senator Ed McBroom, who's chair of the Senate Oversight Committee. It's available on the legislature's website and is a very good resource for combating some of the misinformation that we've had. The total vote turnout that we think is a result of some of our changes with Promote the Vote, as you can see, greatly increased in 2020 by 652,000 voters. And you can see the major cities, and you're one of them. So we increased voter turnout. We also greatly increased absentee ballot voting. I don't think we'll know for several elections if the absentee ballots were an increase because of COVID or because of the change for no reason, but nearly 2/3 of the vote cast were by absentee ballots. And again, your city's listed as one of the top 10 cities. We went from 1.3 million in 2016 to 3.3 million in 2020. The reaction in the Michigan legislature has been exhausting. We've had over 100 bills introduced to change election law in the Michigan House. There are all sorts of topics, from moving the primary election from August to June, to training for election challengers, to flagging dead voters, requiring signature verification training. This week, the House committee took up a bill. They didn't pass it out of committee yet, but it was to somehow watermark or make sure that absentee ballots could not be copied in any form and reproduced. And in Senate bills, there were 39 that were introduced in March. And if you're a local league member, I know you saw information about that when it happened. They had a press conference on March 24th introducing the package. But there are also over 60 other bills, so at least another 100 in the Senate. And those bills change laws for voting registration, and they change how we administer elections. They increase the power of the partisan challengers, and they change how elections are certified. Remember, that was on March 24th. Just to remind you of the legislative process quickly, and I wish I was better at graphics, but the Senate Elections Committee takes up a bill. There are 5 members. Senator Ruth Johnson is the chair. Some of you probably know her because she used to be the Secretary of State. They take a vote, and when it's voted out, it goes to the Senate for a vote where the 38 members vote and send it to the House Elections and Ethics Committee. The House Elections and Ethics Committees chaired by a former clerk from, I believe, Brighton Township, Ann Boleyn. After it comes out of that committee, it goes to the House for a vote. Then once it's passed the House, if it's in the same form as it came over, it goes back to the Senate and to the governor. The governor has the option to sign or veto the bill. If she vetoes, the Republicans the members can override the veto by 2/3 vote. And if you look at the numbers right now, the total number is 38 senators, but right now we have 2 vacancies. So there are 20 Republicans, 16 Democrats. It takes 24 of them to override a veto. And in the House, there are 110 members. There's 58 Republicans, 52 Democrats, so it takes 73 to override that. So what's happened? Well, the committee with Senator Ruth Johnson and the other members have been meeting on the bills that were in that 39 bill package that was introduced the end of March. They started the hearings on April 21st. It took them almost a month because they had a spring break. They are continuing to take up the bills. They've already had testimony on all 39 of the bills, and the bills are listed here. To Senate Bill SB is for Senate Bill 273 through 311 and 334. 9 bills have moved. 2 bills are awaiting action by the governor right now. Senate Bill 303 and Senate Bill 304. Both of them go together to require more identifying information in order to get an absentee ballot. And they eliminate the use of the affidavit that I reminded you about at the polling place if you don't have an ID. And it eliminates the Secretary of State or clerks from providing absentee ballots without an application. And then Senate Bill 304 goes with this, but it specifies requirements for submitting a provisional ballot and verifying your identity with the clerk if you don't have the proper ID at the voting place. We keep an update on these 39 bills on the State League website, and you can look it up and see the status and what action the league has taken. we keep it updated as meetings happen. Right now, the governor's vetoed 6 bills, and we won't go into all of them, but two of these, the last 2, were in the Senate bill package. But then you can see the other 4 were House bills that came over that were not in the Senate package. But they did such thing as allowing expansion of polling place locations. She vetoed that, she said, because wasn't sure of the criteria and that would be used. It included places like golf courses and other places. And then the bill that required comprehensive training for clerks and political party organizations and committees, the election challengers didn't have any funding to go with it. And there was a bill to block third-party access to the qualified voter file. That's already the rule. And she vetoed the one banning voting machines from being connected to the internet on election day, because that's already the rule. And then there was a bill mandating that county clerks remove dead voters from the qualified voter file once a month. But that's done right now by local clerks. And then Senate Bill 280 was dealing with initiative petitions and when they had to be go through the process with the Department of State and the Board of Canvassers. One of her things in her veto message was talking about that these perpetuate what she called the big lie. So there are a lot of resources available for you on our website about these bills, but you can also look up minutes and testimony. Lots of organizations, Voters Not Politicians, ACLU, Promote the Vote. We've all given testimony. You can read that at either with the Senate website or the House website. And you can look up any of the bills at the legislative website and know its status and see an analysis. So what you can do is to stay informed, because we all need information and we need it regularly and we need it updated. And we also encourage you to look at a fact check section that the Secretary of State's put on her website to emphasize that the election was safe, secure, and fair. I find that resource very good for getting answering some questions that you all might have. Just to remind you, the Secretary of State also had a legislative agenda, and we don't have time to go into it, but she was working for equitable access, a strong infrastructure, and secure elections. As you can imagine, given the times, these bills have, some have been introduced, but none of these are going anywhere in the current legislature. So I'll stop here for questions.
The information that you shared is so important. We have about 5 or 10 minutes right now between Judy's presentation and Mark's presentation. And Chris is monitoring the chat. I've had a couple of questions sent in by people to me that I have, but I'm going to check with Chris to see if there's any questions there that you want to bring forward first.
There's one question that we'll cover after Mark speaks, because it's more of along his portion of the presentation. But one question is in chat is, what is the possibility for national voting rights legislation, and how would that affect Michigan's situation to protect access to voting?
I'm going to hold on that question till after Mark, because that's part of our presentation. I'm going to come back to that. Okay.
Okay, I had a couple kind of specific questions that came through. One of them was related to the movement of the primary from August to June, and the person wondered what the impact of that would be and why someone would want to do that. Do you have any idea about why that was part of it?
I don't know that there was a hearing on that bill, but I think the there has been a debate for many years about moving the primary and giving candidates more time before the November election and hopefully to improve the turnout. And that isn't that great in an August primary. Mark, do you know more?
I think that's right, Judy. I would only add that local clerks and election administrators have long wanted more time between the primary and the general because there's so much that has to be done. So I think that's the other part of it. If it were ever to happen, of course, it would move everything else in the election calendar back. Candidates now file in April. They'd be filing in February. So it would shift the calendar dramatically. Some of you may remember Michigan once had spring elections. And so if this happens, we're kind of inching back toward that.
Another question someone had is about the governor's veto signature power and how much time. Is there a deadline in terms of when she has to sign or veto something that comes before her or not?
Is it 10 days or 14? I think it's in the Constitution.
Okay.
Is it 14, Mark?
You know, Judy, I don't recall. It's one of those two.
I'll look it up while we're talking, but I know it's a period of time and I want to say it's 14, but I've got my Michigan Constitution, so I can look it up while Mark's talking.
Chris, did you have any other ones that came through in the chat?
I don't believe so, but I will check chat again. No, I do not.
Okay. So we're going to move on to Mark's portion of the presentation. I want to remind everybody that we will try to address your questions if we don't get a chance to during the presentation afterwards. So please keep putting them in there as we go through. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Attorney Mark Brewer for his remarks on both the Secure My Vote petition, as well as the status of the National Popular Vote Initiative petition. As before, remember to put questions in the chat and we'll have a chance to discuss those afterwards. Okay, Mark.
Thank you, Lynn, very much. And I want to thank the league for inviting me here tonight. I've really enjoyed working and representing the statewide league in many cases over the years. And so again, thank you for having me tonight. As Lynn just indicated, my task is to review for you, summarize for you the pending circulating Secure MI Vote petition, but also to talk briefly about the National Popular Vote petition. Full disclosure, we are neutral tonight, and this is an educational forum, but I have been speaking out against the Secure MI Vote petition, and the National Popular Vote petition is a client of mine. So I just want to make that disclosure, but this is purely educational tonight. You'll hear no advocacy from me. So the Secure MI Vote petition is basically parts of the bill package that you heard Judy so thoroughly describe. That they have taken parts of that package, some of those proposals, and put them together in an initiative petition to amend the Michigan election law. So as we all know, you gather signatures in that process, and this petition is on the streets being circulated. And then if you get enough signatures, it goes to the legislature under a rather unique provision of the Michigan Constitution that lets the legislature adopt it, in which case it does not go to the voters. And the sponsors of this petition have said that that is their plan, that they intend to get enough signatures, have the legislature adopt it. And that means that Governor Whitmer can't veto it, as she has been vetoing the bills that Judy has described. This is not the first time we've seen this technique used, but they've been very public about that as their plan. They have no intention of putting this on the ballot next year. So let me go through and describe for you the chief provisions of this petition. First of all, it makes a significant change in voter registration. In order to register to vote in Michigan going forward under this proposal, you would have to provide the last 4 digits of your social security number. That's currently optional. This makes it mandatory. I gotta tell you, this proposal is very poorly drafted, but based on my reading of it, I believe that means you can't register to vote unless you're willing to provide the last 4 digits of your social security number. The proposal then makes a number of significant changes in terms of voting, but let's first deal with voters who vote at a polling place. As you all know, when you go to a polling place, you are asked to provide photo ID. However, if you don't have it, you can fill out that affidavit on the back of the short application that you fill out when you arrive in the polling place. That basically says, I am who I say I am, and you sign that under penalty of perjury. And then you're allowed to vote a regular ballot. That's called the affidavit option. This proposal would eliminate the affidavit option. And so under this, you either show a photo ID and get a regular ballot. If you do not, you'll be offered what's called a provisional ballot, which will not be counted on election day and will not be counted at all unless within 6 days of the election, you go to the clerk's office and not only present photo ID, but also proof of identity and residency in that community. So actually it's tougher requirement than what we have now for showing up at the polls. So that's a very, very significant change in terms of what happens in a polling place. But there are also some very significant changes in the absentee ballot process. First, you may all recall that last year, the Secretary of State and many local clerks very much proactively distributed absentee ballot applications. They were mailed out. You can go to Secretary of State's website and punch a button and get an application sent to you by email. This proposal says that can no longer be done. That the only way a voter can get an application to vote absentee is by specifically requesting it. So there will no longer be any proactive mailings or distribution of applications or buttons on clerks' websites. Matter of fact, I believe this language also means that a clerk could not go to a public function and hand out applications because, again, nobody has specifically asked for that application. So that's going to be a very significant change in the way of doing business. I also think that the clerk's practices of permanent absentee ballot application lists will probably be illegal if this becomes law. Then, though, when a voter goes ahead and applies for an absentee ballot, there's a very significant change. Right now, a voter who applies for an absentee ballot does not have to provide photo ID. The security mechanism, which has worked very well in Michigan, is the signature that Judy adverted to. That signature on the outside of the envelope, both when you mail in your absentee ballot as well as your application, is checked. It's verified against the state's master list. That's the security mechanism. This would add to that a photo ID requirement or usage of your social security number, those 4 digits that I mentioned a few moments ago. So you'd have to make a copy of your photo ID and provide it, or provide that social security number. If you don't do either of those things or do them unsuccessfully, you'll get a provisional ballot back in the mail with the same restrictions that I described for voters at the polling place. That within 6 days of the election, you have to go to the clerk's office, show a photo ID, and otherwise verify your identity and residence, or that absentee ballot, that provisional absentee ballot, will not be counted, will not be counted. There are provisions in this which actually guarantee that there will be drop boxes available in various locations. There are also a couple of provisions regarding AV ballots having to be returned by 8 p.m. on election day. That's currently the law in Michigan, but this proposal repeats it as well. Why that's being done, I don't know. I think the final big significant provision, before I get to one process issue, is that, as has been widely reported, last year, tens of millions of dollars flowed into Michigan from charitable organizations. We had huge demands last year. Obviously, absentee voting was up tremendously, which led to more printing, more postage, and more staff being needed. And this charitable money, which flowed into Michigan, was a tremendous help. It was distributed on a bipartisan basis around the state to help with election administration. This proposal says no more, that you can only use money appropriated by a government to pay for elections, but it goes beyond that. It has a very broad definition of what it calls in-kind contributions. And so, again, as I read this proposal, any folks who volunteer their time, that would no longer be legal. Churches or community organizations that want to donate space for a polling place, illegal. It has to be paid for. So this is going to have an impact, I believe, on the cost of elections, not just cutting off charitable money, but increasing the cost because clerks will no longer be able to accept free help or services from anybody. That will all become a prohibited in-kind contribution. One final process point I do want to mention is that this proposal also contains an appropriation of money. The effect of that is that if this becomes law in the way that the proponents want it to, passed by the legislature, voters will not be able to have a referendum on it. That is cut off when there's an appropriation in a bill. So again, not only do the supporters of this intend not to go to the ballot with it, but they also are intending to basically limit the ability of voters to put it to a referendum should it be adopted. So that's an overview of that petition. And if I may, in a few remaining minutes before we take questions, I'll give a quick summary of the national popular vote proposal. This is an interstate agreement between states as to how presidential elections should be conducted, how the votes actually should be counted for president. Right now, the only office in the country where a person can be elected without taking a majority of the vote is the presidency, because of the way the electoral college system currently works. This proposal says that we're going to count all of the votes for all of the candidates nationwide, and the winner of that count is going to be the person who is going to become president. And the way that is done is by having the states which join the agreement agree that they will cast their electoral college votes for that national popular vote winner. This is an agreement between the states. So far, states representing 195 electoral college votes have joined it. My client and I were seeking to have Michigan now become one of those states along with others. But this agreement does not take effect until states representing 270 electoral votes, a majority, have signed on. And what would happen at that point is that all the votes nationwide would be counted, not just the votes in those states, but every vote would be counted. We would see who the national popular vote winner was. And then those states that have joined this agreement would cast their electoral votes for that person. Doesn't abolish the electoral college. You know, it's not an amendment to the Constitution. It uses the existing electoral college function to ensure that the person who is elected gets a majority of the votes. This has been adopted, as I indicated, in states totaling 195 electoral college votes. Here in Michigan, we are attempting to do this by an initiative petition. It's pretty clear the legislature will not enact it. And so we've begun the process of that. And just this past Tuesday, the Board of Canvassers approved the summary for the petition. There's one more step in terms of approving the petition. And then this group will be able to take to the streets and begin to collect signatures. And unlike Secure My Vote, this one, if we get enough signatures, will end up on the ballot next year. So voters can decide for themselves whether they want to join this agreement. With that, Lynn, again, thank you very much. And thank you to the league for having me tonight. And I'd be glad to join Judy in taking questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate you sharing not only information about Secure My Vote, but also the National Popular Vote Initiative. I know that there are some questions. I've seen them popping up here. So I'm going to turn it over a little bit to Chris, and I'll let you ask a few. And then I have a few that were submitted also. So we can kind of go back and forth a little bit.
All right, sounds good. All right, so one question is, does your photo ID address have to match your voting address?
No, under this proposal, that is not required. But I would indicate to you that if you show a photo ID that doesn't match your address in the voter file, you may well be challenged in terms of your eligibility to vote. So while it's not technically required, it could be a basis for a challenge.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to ask one more from chat, Lynn, because it kind of relates to the ID,
Sure.
and then we can switch to yours. One question was, well, two questions in a row. How many voters need to sign an affidavit in a typical election? And are there areas in the state that have more affidavits than others?
There's usually several thousand affidavits around the state. That may not sound like many, but it's typically several thousand, Kristine, in an election. And those affidavits, though, tend to be coming from areas where there are minority or poor voters. And that's who will be impacted most by this change because they don't have photo ID and it's difficult to get it. So we'll have an impact on poor and minority voters.
Okay, thank you. And then Lynn?
Okay, so here's one from one of our members. Given the process that is going on with the proposal right now, the Secure My Vote petition, I believe is the one they're talking about. What is the likelihood of its becoming law? And then if it does, is there a way to reverse it once it's there?
So a little bit about the mechanics, if I may, Lynn. The group called Unlock Michigan successfully circulated a petition, initiative petition that the legislature passed, which repealed the emergency powers of the Governor's Act that Governor Whitmer had used during the pandemic. And they showed a lot of grassroots energy. I'll be very candid with you. There were paid signatures in that effort, but there were a lot of volunteer signatures. From what I can tell, basically that same group is gathering signatures for this effort. And I believe that they have the energy in the organization that they can gather this sufficient signatures. They need about 341,000 valid signatures, but I believe they can get there. If that happens, I think at least two things will happen. First, there will be a challenge to those signatures, and that's permitted. When the Bureau of Elections checks the signatures, there's a process for opponents to challenge the validity of the signatures. Assuming they get through that and the legislature actually adopts it, I believe there will be litigation over this. I think there are arguments, and Judy kind of adverted to this, that at least some of these provisions violate Proposal 3 from 2018. So I think there's a long path here until we finally see whether this takes effect and actually for which elections it takes effect. If they don't get their petitions filed until next year, this will not take effect until 2023. If they're able to get it filed and the legislature pass it this year, it will be in effect for next year's elections. Sorry for the complicated answer here.
No, that made it a lot clearer. Thank you.
I just wanted to remind that something Mark said earlier, it also, because of that $3 million, we can't do a referendum on it. So the voters can't repeal it.
So we're stuck with it. So I guess that maybe brings us to another question that someone raised. And this, Judy, you might be talking about this a little bit with the federal legislation, is if the federal legislation goes through, then does that circumvent what happens in Michigan with the proposal right now?
We are going to talk about that
Okay.
later.
All righty. Chris, did you have any other ones?
Yes, I have some. Let me try to scroll here. Okay.
While you're scrolling, Chris, I looked up in the Constitution and it's Article 4, Section 33. The governor has 13 days, 14 days from the time of presentation to veto a bill.
Thank you for checking on that. And then the next question is for you, Judy. So since the petition takes money out of the elections funds contributions, was there the same amount of money or less passed in the state budget for 2021 to 2022?
There was a decrease in the funding for the Secretary of State in the budget that was just adopted. But I can't tell you where it was. I haven't looked at that part, but I know there was no increase given for all of these things that the package of bills would like to have in effect.
Okay. And then did you have any other questions, Lynn, or did you want me to read some more from the chat?
Nope, go ahead. I'm good.
Okay, I think this has been answered indirectly, but hearing it again sounds good. Who is expected to be the most affected by the changes in registration and absentee voting by this petition?
I think on registration with the social security number, I think that's going to vary tremendously. I've given presentations like this where I've had people say to me, look, I've been a victim of identity theft. There is no way I'm going to provide a social security number, either to register to vote or to get an absentee ballot. And if it means I can't register to vote, I won't. So I think that's what's going to happen, Kristine, and all of you. People have varying levels of tolerance for risk of identity theft, those kind of things. That 4 digits of your social security number is going to be accessible by thousands of people. Anybody who has access to the qualified voter file is going to be able to see it. So that's that piece. On absentee voting, we have such a huge number of people voting absentee now, all different demographics, right? Genders, races, backgrounds. You got to think about who has access to a copier, right? Who's going to be able to copy their photo ID and attach it to a petition? Who's going to be willing to put their social security number on there? And I also think, though, it'll affect voters who are just, the logistics of voting are already complex, and this is just going to make it harder. And this is just not worth it, right? So I can't predict any particular group, Kristine, that's going to be affected by this. I think the effect's going to be widespread and pretty massive, particularly on the absentee voting front.
Okay. And then I just get 2 more questions in chat. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, Judy.
I was just going to say, one of the issues they put in that proposal was the $10 to get a state ID for free. But right now it costs $10 and there are provisions for hardships. But if you remember the Ari Berman book that was talked about when he spoke to the National League Convention a few years ago, the problem isn't with getting the ID, it's paying $400 or some amount to get your immigration papers or a birth certificate or things that you might not have access to and cost a lot more than $10.
That's an important point. And then there's just 2 more questions in chat, and then I think we can move on. Will people already registered to vote need to provide a social security number, for their?
Again, this is poorly written, Kristine, but as I read it, you won't have to provide it to stay registered. But if you want to vote absentee, you'll either have to provide that photo ID or the social security number. Again, that's optional at this point, but this will require it, one or the other.
Okay, and then another excellent question. These are all excellent questions. Thank you, everybody. Do you know if there are other states that have this type of initiative, the petition initiative that circumvents the governor's veto? And if so, are there similar ones to ours?
There's only one other state, I think it's the state of Washington, that has something similar. So Michigan is quite unique in this regard. I've done a lot of research on this for a variety of reasons. Michigan has had this since 1913. We originally copied it from California. California got rid of it in 1966. And so we're basically the lone state that allows this kind of bypass of the governor.
Interesting.
Yeah. Judy, I'm going to let you jump back in here and talk a little bit
Okay.
about the federal legislation.
Okay. So as you probably all know from the news, 19 states passed 33 laws this year, according to the Brennan Center. And you can see where they are with new restrictive laws. And we may become the 34th, and I think some other states are still in the process. But to address this at the federal level, there have been bills introduced, and I know you've all gotten these action alerts from national, but HR 1, the For the People Act, would expand voting rights, end gerrymandering, and limit campaign finance. That bill has passed the U.S. House of Reps. It is still waiting action in the Senate. The U.S. House also passed HR 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. That was to restore the Voting Rights Act that was originally signed by Lyndon President Johnson in 1965. We're awaiting action on those two bills, plus a third one that we've all learned about from the National League called the Freedom to Vote Act. It's believed if we could get, especially HR 1 or the Freedom to Vote Act, hopefully all, at least those, one of those, that it would allow litigation in those states, whether or not it would overturn all of the laws that have passed, including what happens, we don't know yet with Secure My Vote. But it would give a possibility, and that's the impetus behind the federal legislation. What we urge you to do is stay up to date on this on the national website, www.lwv.org. They keep this information updated, and I'm sure you've all gotten action alerts. And again, we still need to educate people that the elections were safe and secure. One of the things that we're really trying to talk about is the problems with mis and disinformation that's going on. And it's real important that we not share false information and that we call it out when we see it by removing it, if it's anything to do with us. How to spot disinformation is to consider the source, check the date, cross-check information, and read past the headline, and question emotionally charged content. I think we're all aware of where this occurs on Facebook or in the news broadcasts. But what we can do as the League is make sure that we never quote the bad information, don't repeat it so that it doesn't go any further. Refer to the bad information, such as, I don't know if you want to use the term big lie or misinformation about the voting results, but that's up to you. And then focus on providing the correct information and include trustworthy sources. The League's a trusted organization, and a lot of people look to us for accurate information. So I think we have a head start there in being able to combat mis and disinformation. And just to come to an end before we take questions, Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So hopefully that answers the question we had about the federal bill legislation that might overcome some of the bad legislation that's passed and that might pass here and has passed in other states.
What I'd like to do at this point, before we take any final questions that people may have had as they were listening to Judy talk about the federal legislation, is introduce our League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County President, Joan Sampiri, who is going to just talk a little bit about what we can do at the local level, opportunities for members, and she's going to say a few words. Joan?
Thank you, Lynn. I live out in Western Washtenaw. And so I'm in a broadband desert. You might lose me, or I might come in and out, part of the overall program. I'd like to thank you for being with us tonight. This was an awful lot of information to all of us a great deal to think about. There's so much going on regarding voting rights here in Michigan and nationally that we wanted to start by bringing you up to date on key issues. And I think that's what our two presenters and questions have done. Things are moving quickly. It was for members only. We'll make the recording available to everyone. In a couple of days, you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the recording so you can watch it again, just in case you can't quite remember everything you were told. And you can watch it with friends and colleagues. We'll include links to the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County website, the Michigan League website.
Yeah.
We'll ask you to stay informed so that when it's time to take action, you're prepared to do that from a solid base of understanding. And I'll toss it back to you, Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Joan. We want to make sure that everybody has had a chance to ask any of their questions, so I'm going to just open it up here.
Yes, and also I can read a question from chat, and we also have Shelley who's raised her hand, so we can go to Shelley after that. It says, we need to keep informed on this national legislation, yet what are the League of Women Voters' national actions to promote access to voting?
They've been lobbying on the bills that I mentioned. I know there's even demonstrations in front of the Capitol that the League's participating in. I mean, in front of the White House, I think, that the League's participating in also with other coalition partners. And then they're sending out action alerts. Not sure if that addresses her question.
It seems to, but we can also give Susan, the one who asked it, a chance to, after Shelley, unmute and ask more questions about it. But that seems to address it. And then as people are asking questions, in addition to unmuting, feel free to turn your camera on as you're asking a question so that we can see you. I think we mainly wanted the cameras off during the PowerPoint presentations and the main presentation. So anybody that wants to turn their camera on as they're asking questions is fine. And Shelley, thank you for asking a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious if the petitions are currently circulating, do we know how they're doing? Does anybody know, is there any information on how many signatures they do have, or if they're, if they're being successful at all?
No, I don't know of any group, Shelley, and all of you that ever really publicizes that until they file. I mean, they'll say things like, it's going great, but I've never seen any group disclose numbers, so we have no idea.
Okay. Could I just add one other thing, Chris, to the question about what are the national league national actions? They have a Facebook page and a web page where they have everything, that they're doing, and their calls to action and all kinds of stuff out there. So if you are on Facebook or you just want to go out to their web page, it's very useful.
Thank you, Shelley. And then Judy, were you going to say anything more on that, or? Okay, no. I just want to make sure that, yeah, so Lynn and I really encourage any other questions people have. about the issues we've discussed this evening? And I don't believe I've missed any in chat, but I'll look it up again just to be sure.
Sure.
Cheryl, did you have a question or are you just kind of saying hello?
No, I actually did have a question.
Okay.
And this would be for Mark. I'm really curious, since in the petition, we're treating absentee voters very differently than in-person voters, where we're requiring a social security number. And that strikes me as being very uneven and something that might be litigated. Or is that a misperception on my part?
I think that's certainly possible, Cheryl. What I think they're trying to do, the authors of the petition, is avoid the argument that photo ID is unconstitutional, because there are arguments about that by saying, well, there's alternatives. You could just give us your social security number and you don't have to do photo ID. So I think we're going to have legal arguments over all of that. But I think that's what they're trying to do, create an alternative to photo ID.
I got another question real quick, and this would probably go to Mark as well. It also strikes me as being really odd that we would eliminate signatures, which are actually better in terms of identification than photo IDs, which can be falsified, particularly in person. So again, is that something that could be litigated? Because signatures are harder to falsify.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't want to give the impression, this proposal does not eliminate the signatures that you would have to put on the outside of the envelope. Those will still be there and they'll still be checked. This is in addition to those signatures.
Understood, but we're not requiring any more than an affidavit to be signed. And when you would still fill out an application to vote, then would that be correct? And so that's where the signature would be for an individual?
Well, when you show up in a
In-person.
voting place, in my experience, they don't really check, your signature on the affidavit. You're signing that under oath. And so what happens there is if you've lied, they can get you after the election, right?
Right.
That's what happens there. I think this is going to get all wrapped up in the issue that I adverted to a couple of times, which is that we do not have a problem at all with people showing up in this state and impersonating another voter. It just doesn't happen in a polling place. And the few times we've had some absentee ballot fraud, it's been caught and prosecuted. So again, part of the legal arguments are going to be, what's the problem here? What is the state trying to protect when in fact we don't have a fraud problem in the state?
Okay. Thank you.
It was interesting on that issue of signatures. There was a House, the House substituted a bill. They were going to add the signature onto the qualified voter file and make the poll worker verify your signature on your form that you fill out when you go in, that you hand them with the signature on the qualified voter file. And the clerks, who have given excellent testimony on these bills in committee, really explained the problem with that, because a poll worker works 2 days, maybe in an election year, and here they would be having a responsibility for signature verification. Plus they couldn't afford to pay staff who might know how to do signature verification to have them in every polling place. So that bill got substituted again.
Susan.
Judy mentioned Senator Ed McBroom's report about the security in the 2020 election. And one of the issues, or the issue that is behind all of this petition and everything else, is all of the fraud that went on that we have to deal with. And our responsibility to a great extent is to give facts that say there wasn't any. And Ed McBroom's report is an excellent thing to look at and to give people and share with people so that they can find out what went on. Senator McBroom is a Republican, and his committee, led by him, came out with a report that said 2020 election was very secure. But I wanted to let you know that on our website, on the front page, there's a little article, and it includes a link to actually see his report and read the whole thing. It's 45 pages long. It's really interesting, actually, and something we all should be using as ammunition in this fighting of the misinformation. So that's my spiel.
Thank you, Susan.
That report will be part of any lawsuit that is
Mm,
brought if this ever becomes law.
Cheryl, another
Yeah,
one,
this is-
Cheryl.
Yeah, this is another litigation question for Mark then. If you're talking about proof, how about all of the testimony that was under oath in the Senate last year, particularly testimony by Thomas on the security of the election, particularly in Detroit? Is that submissible too? Because that was excellent.
Yeah, no, I expect to be part of any litigation, frankly. I just can't with you.
Sorry.
That's the kind of evidence that will be looked at. I mean, Chris Thomas, he was an expert witness in a number of the cases last year, and the courts credited him across the board as being an expert and testifying like that. So again, that'll be part of the evidence that'll be presented if there's ever a lawsuit.
I would add, if anybody wants to go into the video files for the Michigan Senate, that testimony is on file to watch, and Chris is brilliant. I thought that was that whole process of him being cross-examined at the end by one of the senators, or at least the attempt, is just brilliant on his part. So I'd encourage anybody to watch that. I thought it was great.
I'm just going to say this. Chris was the unsung hero of the 2020 elections.
He was
Both
totally
before and
Yeah.
after. He was always there. You know, he was at the TCF Center. He helped manage and run that process. He was our expert in court and in many, many other ways. Thank God for Chris Thomas.
Yeah, no kidding. Agreed.
All right, well, thank you. I'm going to bring one more person on, Susan Smereck, who is the co-chair of the Voting Rights Working Group. And she's going to give a couple closing remarks, and then we're going to end the event tonight. Sue?
Okay, you will hear me. I cannot start my video. It says I am unable to do that. On behalf of the League of Women Voters Voting Rights Interest Group, I would like to thank our presenters, Judy Kranjiff of the Michigan League of Women. Maybe here we go. Of the Michigan League of Women Voters, and Mark Brewer, voting rights attorney, for presenting tonight's excellent presentation. I would also like to thank our very skilled tech team, without whom we would not have been able to bring this to you. Thank you also to Lynne Kochmanski, our moderator, and Joan Sampiri, our president of the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County. Lastly, thanks to each of you who has joined us tonight, as well as those who contributed questions. If you want to share this presentation with others, as Susan Woolley mentioned, this will be on, you'll receive a link, and it will be on the League of Women Voters website with a little YouTube button to watch. For ongoing information, continue to watch the local, state, and National League of Women Voters websites. Contact us if you would like to join our efforts of the Voting Rights Interest Group. Though not our topic for tonight, remember to vote on November 2nd in the election if you have any candidates or proposals on your ballot. Thank you and good night.